Hi, and welcome to this particular special presentation we've got today, where we're looking at a major piece of potential legislation, I should say. Let's underline that word potential, around energy efficiency. It's a conversation I'm having daily with our landlords, but it's also something that I've been sort of banging on about now for over 6 months to try and get the sort of message out there. It's all about the energy efficiency legislation. And I'm really delighted that today I've got my friend Richard Othick, who is an EPC domestic energy assessor. But more importantly than that, I would say he's like me. He's on a bit of a mission to try and get the message out there to landlords about this potential legislation that's looming large, and what are the ramifications and the implications. So I'm really pleased that Richard's going to just take us all through for the next few minutes what the potential implications are. What is this nonsense that the government are looking to bring in yet more regulation, and how can we best tackle it? Because it's only when we're educated and we have that knowledge that we can then make that informed decision rather than putting our head in the sand. So that's what we're trying to do for our clients. So Richard, thank you so much for sharing the time with us today, and
Thanks
I'll just pass it over to you, Richard. Off you go.
Thanks. Hi. So yeah, I'm Richard from Leeds. Run a small company called Green Earth Energy Improvements. And as Richard says, I'm a domestic energy assessor and a retrofit assessor as well. So the new legislation that's going through Parliament is to propose to bring new tenancies up to an EPC rating of a C by 2025, and existing tenancies up to an EPC rating of a C by 2028, which is a marked improvement from the current rating of an E. And there's some significant changes that are needed to comply with this new legislation if it does in fact come into play. In terms of exemptions available under the current laws, that there are exemptions for listed buildings, and there's a cost cap as well, which is expected to be carried over in a sense. Listed buildings, yes, there will be exemptions. And in terms of a cost cap, it's not yet been defined in the legislation, as you can see here. However, to give an indication of potential costs, there is a part about domestic premises. So it's also proposed that by 2035, all residential properties to be bought and sold will have to be an EPC rating of a C. So although this is much further down the line, they have actually defined a cost cap for this of £20,000. So it gives you an indication of the sort of level of works that the government's expected to be carried out for landlords to be legislative. I would guess probably around £10,000 cap for landlords in 2025 and 2028. I wouldn't be surprised at that at all. I think at the moment it's 3,500, and I would definitely expect it to go up from that. Not just to motivate to get a better result in terms of the works that are done and the higher EPC rating, but also we all know what's happened to the cost of labour and materials, etc. In the last few years. So £3,500 doesn't go anywhere near as far as it used to a few years ago. So where's the bill up to at the moment is one of the most common questions I get asked. So on the 6th of May, it had the second reading in Parliament. As you can see, there's quite a few stages for it still to go through. There's still time for it to be amended, time for it to be changed, before it actually goes through the Royal Assent and becomes legislative law. So as I follow it through the process and update people as and when the results come out of the from Parliament. So as a company and as an assessor, what do? Specifically, I work with landlords regularly to improve the EPC rating of property. So I think many energy assessors will come and sort of do the assessment for you, and then that, I think the level of advice then is lacking, and the clear path from getting from E to C, for example, can really be missing. And on top of that, we also offer like a turnkey service. So we'll come and do the EPC, the retrofit assessment, map out the potential improvements for the property, and give you a clear indication of what measures are available to install, how much would it cost. We'll give you a quote for that, and specifically how many EPC points is it going to improve by. And we'll also, as part of the service, give you the multiples that you need to add up to get to a C. So if you do X, Y, Z, it's going to cost this, and then at the end of it, you're guaranteed your C rating at the end. So there's a list there of different measures that we cover. It's essentially everything that's under the EPC software at the moment. This is an example of a retrofit assessment. So like I say, it's about going and assessing the property and mapping out specifically the improvements. So as you can see, this property was an E. You know, this is a regular sort of typical property that getting called to by landlords and how they can improve it to a C rating. So as you move down the list there, the main thing is to insulate the property. The EPC software itself is based around U values. So it's really important to get that U value as low as possible. And the key to doing that is insulating walls, roofs, underfloor, etc. So a common one, I think, you know, old terrace solid wall properties are very common in landlords' buy-to-let portfolios. So naturally, internal wall insulation then becomes common in terms of a measure that's installed to upgrade the rating. It also has a significant impact in doing so. So as you can see there, this property has a room in the roof, quite an old room in the roof, no insulation was present. So insulating that first is going to do most of the legwork. As heat rises, that's going to get you 8 points and be fairly cost effective to do just by getting through the hatch into the eaves area at the back of the room and insulating that, and then onto the internal wall insulation. So for the EPC software, you only have to insulate your externally facing walls. So 50 mil of insulation on the inside does, again, most of the work. It is fairly costly to install, but it does have a really, really big benefit. But within that cost as well includes removing any radiators and electric points that are on the externally facing wall, installing the insulation, plasterboard, then plastering it, skirting board, and then putting the radiator back and putting all the electric points back as well. So it's then ready to paint, so it's handed over, ready for you to pick a colour, and that's the scope of the work. So although it is fairly expensive, it's quite a comprehensive service, and it's made good and handed back, like I say, ready to be painted. Again, still sticking with the theme of insulation, 150 mil is the standard for underfloor insulation, and again, it's fairly, if you can get underneath your suspended timber floor, sometimes via a basement, it can be fairly easy and fairly cheap to do, and a good way to get a couple of points. Then what comes after insulation is the heating system itself and how that's controlled. So most properties are now combi boiler with the TRVs as well as your programmers and your boiler controls. So the key thing is to change that from manually adjusted TRVs into time and temperature zone control, which can be done by smart radiator thermostats, so smart TRVs. They're fairly cheap, 50-60 quid each. And can be fit for a couple of £100. What that allows you to do then is to connect to your phone and then control each room specifically to what temperature without having to move. So I think not many people will run around regularly and change the TRVs manually, but what most people will do is do it from their smartphone fairly regularly and fairly consistently in terms of rooms that they're using or not using even in that particular day. Whereas I think the theme with TRVs is probably a winter to summer and vice versa change, which people might run around the house and do, you know, maybe twice a year. And then lastly, sort of moving on to doors, windows and LED lighting, which I think is a common misconception that it ranks actually a lot higher. And I think that's kind of just misinformation and misled landlords, potentially by people who are not domestic energy assessors, tell them, oh yeah, you need to change LED lights, you know, you need to change your double glazing done. Which, you know, your glazing can be very expensive as well and not really have that much of an impact. So it's about achieving the points for the most cost-effective way possible and hitting those easy wins first. So here's an example of a typical property that we did an installation out. So this was a 2-bed mid-terrace pre-1900s house. This one was in Halifax. So we installed 50 mil of internal wall insulation, 150 mil of room and roof, and then fitted TRVs, which took this over to a C. So they didn't need smart TRVs on this occasion, but it is often, when you're looking for a couple of points, one of the cheap and easy ways that you can tip over from that high D to a low C rating. So the total cost of this was £4,500, which included the assessments, all the installations as well, which took place sort of within a week from end to end. So that was a before and after E51 to C69. Every property is different. They're not all going to cost £4,500. Some are less, some are more. Like I said, every property is different. But these, as I mentioned, are the key things to follow. So insulate first, then it's about what heating system you've got. Have you got an efficient gas combi boiler, or have you got an older one? They do rate significantly differently within the EPC software. Heat pumps and for all electric properties, what high heat retention storage heaters are key over the old large volume storage heaters, which are rated fairly poorly. And then, like I say, into the controls, your thermostats, your TRVs, programmers, etc. Then move into renewables, so solar, PV and solar water heating. Wind turbines are fairly rare unless you live in a farm out in the middle of nowhere. And heat pumps obviously becoming more common now, especially with the government scheme, the BUS scheme, which funds £5,000 of your heat pump install. And then, like I say, onto lighting, doors and windows, which are often mislabeled as more important than they actually are. So what's changing in the software? At the moment, the EPC software, it kind of evolves over time. So if you assess a property 10 years apart, you'll often see the EPC rating going down because the software evolves. So previously, where double glazing was the most energy efficient technology available for windows, and that was rated the best. As triple glazing then became readily available, that was then upgraded to rate the best, and double glazing took a step down. And it's the same theme throughout the software. And one of the key things in the software as it stands today is that electric is rated much more poorly than gas in terms of its energy efficiency rating. However, in recent years, where the UK gets its renewable electricity from is more renewable sources, wind farms, solar farms, etc. Up to the point now where in February it was nearly 40% of the UK's electric was produced from renewable sources. So the EPC software is due an update on the 15th of June to bring that into play and reflect more real world conditions. So what that means is that electric will now actually be slightly better rated than gas. So if you've got an old property which is with the old electric storage heaters on, an all electric property with electric storage heaters and electric water heating, if you reassess that, then it might be an E at the moment and you might be struggling to get it up. If you reassess that or have it reassessed after the 15th of June, you should see a marked improvement in the rating for that, and it should become a lot more viable to then do the improvements to get it up to a C. Whereas at the minute it might be looking like it's really difficult to get there. One of the other reasons is, like I said, the introduction of heat pumps and how popular they are becoming as well. At the moment, if you can have the scenario where you install a heat pump and your EPC rating actually goes down, which obviously isn't the case in the real world scenario. So that'll be re-rated in the system as well. Other benefits of increasing your EPC rating, not only compliance with future-proofing your investment, but also accessing lower mortgage rates. So as part of the bill that I showed you earlier, there is a section in there which is for mortgage lenders, and they have to have 50% of their portfolio an EPC A, B or C by 2030. So this is forcing them to now try and get more landlords with better rated properties onto their books, which is meaning that they offer lower interest rates for A, B and C rated properties. So that's a key thing, I think, for many landlords and investors is accessing those lower interest rates, especially as we start to see them rise now as inflation is going up and the Bank of Interest Rate is putting its rates up all the time. I think we're definitely going to see another rate rise in the next review. So that's, I think, more important than ever. On top of that, increasing the value of your property, future-proofing it, making it more livable for potential tenants, making it more saleable. That it's in itself may well pay for the EPC upgrades that you're having to undertake, and it may be possible to refinance at the end of it and take your money back out. Fourth, I think increasing your rental income. If your tenant is having to pay less in energy bills, I think they'll be more than happy to kind of, split the difference with you. You might be able to charge a little bit more in your rent if they're paying less overall costs, and then everybody's a winner. And you're likely to attract better quality tenants as well, I think.
Richard, there's a lot in there, Richard, in that sort of short presentation. I was furiously writing sort of questions down there. So I appreciate that you had your contact details just briefly at the end. I'll put them in there if you want me to.
Please do. Yeah.
This goes out to my clients if they want to get in touch. Which I guess is the first sort of question, really. If people do get in touch and want your assistance, what sort of geography are you working in? What area can you?
At the moment, I'm based in North Leeds, so West Yorkshire, essentially. At the moment, hopefully that'll will change in the coming years, but yeah, at the moment it's West Yorkshire.
Listen, this will only get momentum, Richard. Absolutely, no doubt. There we go. Now, just an observation as well, Richard. On one of your slides, you mentioned that in the potential legislation, the government have deliberately put an onus on not only the landlords to get the house in order, but on the lenders themselves to have half of their portfolio essentially at C or above. Really, from my point of view, working in financial services, that's really interesting. So that drives the conversation from lenders, not only from just a pure legislation point of view, but clearly just from a practical point of view, that the lenders will be desperate to get this message out to their landlords, because the alternative is the landlord's either going to be one, selling up, and which is lost business for that lender, or two, the landlord that puts his or her head in the proverbial sand when it comes to it, and then realizes they can't advertise a new tenancy because they haven't got a C rating, and all of a sudden there's no rental income coming in, clearly puts them under financial stress, and ultimately can lead to a spike in repossessions, which, despite what we might think about banks, they will want to avoid that, particularly where I can see a glut of properties coming onto the market in 2025 anyway. So that's, the worst
Absolutely.
time.
I think you'll see a certain type. I think a landlord's typical buy-to-let portfolio may shift if you've got larger properties or properties that are costing more to upgrade. You may well see a shift in offloading those and potentially buying a few more of the smaller, your mid terraces, your back-to-backs that are a lot more, cost effective.
I think it will drive a different behavior. Now, something else I want to ask is, under that umbrella heading of buy-to-lets, many of our clients and landlords are now moving away from the traditional buy-to-let and buying, or indeed looking at existing portfolio and saying, actually, these traditional family lets lend themselves to holiday let or serviced accommodation. So where do they stand in terms of this potential change in legislation?
Yeah, it's interesting you should say that, because they're then changing to a holiday let, they don't actually conform to the same legislation. So I thought that I might be interacting with a lot of landlords who were potentially making that jump because of the EPC rating and making the jump over to serviced accommodation to holiday lets as a potential driver for that, and then now potentially would not have any real contact with them anymore. They wouldn't really be interested. But what's interesting is actually a lot of them have come back and said, actually, I'm paying the bills for this now. The gas and electric and the energy efficiency is actually coming out of my pocket. So the other driver for that from them is actually, how profitable is it? How can I make it more profitable? And how can I keep those running costs down? So those landlords who are transitioning over are actually coming back to me to say, actually, what improvements can I make to keep the bills down, not to be compliant legislatively, but to maintain a healthy business model. Yeah,
and something that I've been saying on several of my sort of mortgage updates is that lenders are now trying to incentivize landlords by offering lower interest rate mortgages to bring in new customers that already have an A to C rating. So you'll get a discount on the interest rate. Not a lot. It's about a 0.1% improvement, but hey, free money. But the other thing that lenders are pretty much doing en masse for their existing client base, because this is about, if there's this retrofit of work that needs doing, and you mentioned 3-4 grand might be a typical sort of cost. Then how do you finance that most cost-effective way? It's all right if you only got one property and you've got some savings, but you know, portfolio landlords that might have 5 to 10 properties, different kettle of fish. So again, most lenders seem to be offering further advances. So that's an additional borrowing, like a small loan for 5 or 10 grand. And at least that way, one, they're offering better rates as long as you can prove that that extra borrowing is for an energy efficient purpose. But secondly, it's amortized potentially over 25 years, interest only.
Yeah,
3%. It might only be a 10 quid a month over that length of time. So
I think that's key
there's
as well.
cost-effective way of doing it.
Yeah, and I think the source of finance is key for probably a lot of landlords in unlocking the solution for this. I think a lot will be looking at it in fear, thinking, "Oh my God, I don't know how I'm going to get to a C rate. I don't know how much it's going to cost me. I don't have the confidence that someone's going to take me from E to C." But also, if I do find someone who can do that, how am I going to finance all of these properties? And like you said, I think being able to amortize it over a period of time it is really important. And as I touched on before, I think as a tenant, if your bills are significantly lower for the year, because let's face it, right now they're going to be significantly higher and potentially higher again.
Yeah.
The available saving there is large, to the point where tenants will be willing to pay a little bit more to not have the higher bills. Which is then paying the landlord back for the long-term refinancing of the work. So there is definitely, I think, sources of finance and finding someone to take you from E to C. They're the two key things in terms of making a success of this and stopping certain properties.
I think you're absolutely right that right now, every time you switch the news on, the cost of energy going up is there. So having a conversation where you tend to say, look, I'm going to invest X amount that's going to bring the rating up to a better level, which means your bills will reduce significantly. And perhaps I'll just pass on a small part of that cost to you. Do you think that's a win-win? I think having that conversation right now, at least tenants may well actually understand what's going
and I think
on behind the
it's only
scenes.
going to take this winter, I think, for people to realise, oh my God, this is a lot of money. And then it also opens up the other avenue. I think one of the sort of stumbling points of the bill when it was first announced or it was first talked about was that, okay, so what about long-term tenancies? How are you going to get in, do intrusive works like internal wall insulation? Tenants are not going to let you in. Well, if your bills are costing you however many thousands of pounds per year, I'm sure you'll let a couple of workmen in for 2 or 3 days to put you some insulation in and upgrade your systems if it's going to save you a boatload of money. So I think the rise in energy costs has also, come at a time where it kind of goes hand in hand with this, and people are aware of it, and it motivates not just landlords but also tenants to be more open to the solutions that are available.
Richard, we've pretty much run out of time. Thank you so much for that. Extremely interesting, very informative. And we look forward with bated breath. When do you think, if I was to put a gun to your head, I know there's all these readings to go through. Have you got an idea? We're talking about the end of the year?
I don't. I have been in touch with a couple of members of Parliament to try and get an update to find out, can we put a time scale on it? What does it actually look like? So we can start having these conversations. And I think once you put a time scale on it, then the conversation moves forward much quicker. I'm yet to receive a response with a defined kind of any indication of time, but I am pushing and trying to have those conversations, and the earlier I can get the information.
If you can just let us know as soon as you do, that would be great, Richard. Richard, thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciated. Take care.